Listen, you're not too late. You have not missed your window, and the life you stopped imagining for yourself is not gone. It's just been waiting for you to pick the pen back up. If you have ever felt like you're living a life that almost fits but not quite, stay with me, because what I'm about to share might be exactly what you needed to hear today. This is episode 21. And before we go anywhere, I want you to understand something about what it means that you are here. You did not stumble onto this episode by accident. Whether you have been with me since episode 1 or this is your first time you have pressed play from anything on this show, something in you said yes to this conversation. Something in you recognized that you're built for more than what you have been settling for. That recognition is not small. It is the beginning of everything, and that is what we're getting into today. I'm Caren, and this is The Rewrite, a podcast about finding the courage to pursue the life you already know you're meant to live. Today especially, I want to speak to the person who has been here from the beginning, who showed up for every phase of this work, who stayed even when the episode hit somewhere tender and it would have been easier to step away. This episode is for you, and if you're new here, welcome. It is not an accident that you found this episode. What I'm covering today will give you everything you need to understand what this show is about and why it might be exactly what you have been looking for. And if what I bring to this show resonates with you, subscribe and follow so you never miss a conversation that might be exactly what you need to hear. New episodes drop every week. Today we're closing season 1 of The Rewrite with Caren. 20 episodes, 4 phases, 1 journey. And before we step into what's next, I want to take you back through where you have been, not as a recap, as a mirror, so you can see the full arc of what you have actually done and understand, maybe for the first time, how significant it is. We started in awareness, and the first thing awareness required was honesty, the kind that is uncomfortable to sit with because it doesn't come with an immediate solution. It just comes with the truth. In the earliest episodes of this show, we talked about the moment a life that works starts feeling wrong. Not broken, not failed, just wrong in the way that only you can feel from the inside of it. The way a life that almost fits feels different from a life that actually does. Most people feel that wrongness and immediately try to fix the surface of it. A new routine, a new goal, a new plan layered on top of the same foundation that has not been examined in years. What we did instead was go underneath it. We talked about the hidden cost of waiting, not the obvious cost of missed opportunity, but the deeper cost of a life lived at a fraction of its actual capacity. The version of yourself that keeps showing up in your quietest moments, asking why you're still here when you know there is somewhere else you're supposed to be going. We talked about overthinking, about how the mind that is capable of building something extraordinary is often the same mind that talks you out of starting it, and about how the discomfort you keep avoiding is almost always pointing directly at the direction you need to go. That was phase 1, the awakening. And if you felt it, if something in those earlier episodes landed in a place that had been waiting for exactly that conversation, then you know what it means to be honest with yourself about the gap between where you are and where you were built to be. That honesty was the first act of your rewrite. Phase 2 was harder because awareness is one thing, excavation is another. Excavation means going back into the places you have been avoiding, the relationships that have been quietly keeping who you were, the patterns that you recognize and return to anyway, the beliefs that were never yours to carry but that you've been carrying it so long, they started to feel like facts. We talked about the relationships in your life, not just the ones that were openly harmful, but the ones that were comfortable in a way that kept you exactly who you were instead of who you were becoming. The people whose love was real, but whose presence was designed around a version of you that no longer existed. And the grief that comes with recognizing that not everyone who started with you is meant to go where you are going. We talked about self-sabotage, about how the pattern that keeps pulling you back is rarely a discipline problem and almost always a worthiness wound, the internal belief, quiet and deeply grooved, that the life you want is somehow not available to you, that you are the exception to the possibility that things can actually change. We talked about the beliefs you inherited, the ones handed to you by circumstance, by comparison, by the accumulated weight of being told directly or indirectly where the edges of your life were supposed to be. And the work of questioning those beliefs, not because they were handed to you with malicious intent, but because they were never fully true and you have been living inside of them as though they were. We talked about who you were before the roles took over, the version of yourself that reached without asking permission, that played without questioning whether you were supposed to, that believed without knowing yet that belief required courage. That version did not disappear, it got shelved, and the work of phase 2 was finding it again. Phase 2 was the excavation of everything that was keeping you where you were. And it was uncomfortable precisely because what you found underneath all of it was not the broken person you feared. It was the capable, called, unfinished person you had been burying underneath everyone else's needs and your own doubts. That discovery was the second act of your rewrite. Phase 3 was reconstruction. And reconstruction does not feel the way most people expect it to feel. It doesn't feel like a fresh start with clean energy and clear direction. It feels like building something in the middle of a demolition site, messy and non-linear and requiring you to hold the vision of what you're building while standing in the rubble of what you're leaving behind. We talked about protecting your peace. Not as a luxury, but as a resource, the thing that makes everything you are building possible. And the hard reality that protecting it sometimes means making choices that disappoint people who are comfortable with the version of you that was always available. We talked about readiness, about how ready is not a feeling that arrives before you move. It is a feeling that gets built by moving, and how the version of you waiting to feel ready is the version that never starts, while the version of you who starts anyway is the one who eventually becomes ready by having done the thing. We talked about grief. The grief that comes with becoming someone new. Not the grief of loss from the outside, but the grief of releasing an old identity from the inside. The version of you that was always at the gathering, always available, always filling the space with things that felt good but did not move anything forward. That version had to be grieved before the new one could finally arrive. We talked about the people who went quiet when you started growing and why their silence was never a verdict on whether you should keep going, why the absence of applause is not a reason to stop, and why you're not building this for the people who are not clapping. You are building it for the people who are waiting for it. We talked about motivation and discipline, about how motivation is the jumpstart and discipline is what keeps the engine running after the initial excitement phase, about the mental signal you send every time you talk yourself out of showing up, and how breaking that cycle requires not just deciding differently, but doing differently before the feeling confirms it. And we talked about how far you have already come, about the progress that was real and accumulating even when the metrics had not confirmed it, about the learning curve you climbed without realizing you were climbing it, about the evidence of your growth that was visible to everyone around you before it was visible to you. Phase 3 was the rebuilding, and it required more of you than the first 2 phases because it asked you not just to see clearly or excavate honestly, but to actually build something new in the space you had cleared. That building was the third act of your rewrite. And then phase 4, momentum. We talked about vision, about how you cannot build what you cannot see, about the difference between a wish and a vision. A wish sits in you passively. A vision pulls you forward actively. And how the clarity of what you're building is not optional. It is the foundation that everything else gets built on. We talked about what momentum actually feels like from the inside, not the breakthrough version, the ordinary Tuesday version, the morning where the question of whether you're going to show up has already been answered before you even ask it. where the decision to do the work was made before the resistance had a chance to arrive. And we talked about how most people are already in momentum without knowing it, because they are looking for it to feel like something big when it almost always feels like something ordinary, like forward movement, like checking off the boxes, like the quiet satisfaction of completing what you set out to do on a given day. You have been showing up consistently for something that matters. You are in it. You just have to learn to recognize it. And that recognition, that ability to look at an ordinary week and see the extraordinary accumulation of small, consistent decisions that have been quietly changing who you are, is the fourth act of your rewrite. I want to say something that I think is worth stopping for. Look at what you just did. You moved through 4 phases of one of the most honest conversations available in this space. You sat with questions most people avoid. You did the reflection most people skip. You stayed through the episodes that hit somewhere uncomfortable and the ones that confirmed something you already knew but needed to hear out loud. And here is what that produced. Not a finished product, not a completed version of yourself that has arrived at the destination and can now rest, but something more valuable than that. A relationship with yourself that is more honest than it was when you started. A clearer picture of what you're building and why it matters. A deeper understanding of what has been keeping you where you are and what it actually costs to stay there. And the beginning of a momentum that belongs entirely to you. Built on your decisions, your discipline, your willingness to do the work before the world confirmed it was worth doing. That is not nothing, that is everything. Most people approach change the wrong way. They wait for the right feeling to arrive before they act. They wait for the fear to subside before they start. They wait for the circumstances to align before they move. They wait for the people around them to celebrate before they keep going. They even wait for the evidence to confirm the calling before they answer it. And the waiting is not laziness. It is not a lack of desire. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of how change actually works. Change does not begin when the feeling arrives. It begins when you move before the feeling arrives. It doesn't begin when the fear subsides. It begins when you act in the presence of the fear. It doesn't begin when the circumstances align. It begins when you decide that your circumstances do not get to determine your direction. And it does not begin when the people around you celebrate. It begins when you stop requiring their celebration as a condition for your continued movement. Every single thing we have talked about across these 20 episodes has been pointing at this one truth. You are not waiting for permission. You are waiting for yourself. And the most powerful rewrite you will ever make is the one where you stop waiting and simply begin. Years ago, long before this podcast existed, I used to call myself something, a life author. Not because I had published anything, not because anyone had given me the title, but because I understood something at a gut level that I could not always articulate. I hold the pencil, and at the other end of that pencil, there is an eraser. That is what a rewrite actually is, not a reinvention. Not starting over from nothing. The knowing that at any moment, in any season, regardless of how long a particular chapter has been running, you have the freedom to change the outcome, to erase what is no longer true and write something better in its place. You hold the pencil too. You have always held it. Even in the seasons when you forgot, even in the seasons when you handed it to someone else and let them write chapters you would not have chosen yourself, even in the seasons when the story felt so far off course that starting over seemed like the only option. You are never without the pencil, and your personal power to change the outcome of your life is real. It has always been real. The only thing that has ever stood between you and the life you're built for is the belief that it was not actually available to you. It is. Not for someone else, not for people who started earlier or have more resources or did not make the mistakes you made. For you, exactly as you are, exactly where you are, with the exact story you are carrying right now. That story is not your limitation, it is your material. Before we close this season, there's something I have been waiting to share with you, something I have been building toward for longer than this podcast has existed. I'm at the final stretch of writing my book. The title is The Rewrite. Your story isn't finished yet. And I want to tell you why I wrote it. Not because I had a formula to share or a system to sell, but because I know there's a version of you out there who has always known they were built for something more significant than what they have been living, who feels it, who has always felt it, but has not fully stepped into it. Not lost exactly, but out of sync. Having built a life around everything that needed you, and somewhere in the process of being responsible and reliable and present for everyone else, having put your own calling on hold. Not because you stopped believing in it, but because the timing was never right and the fear was always louder, and the version of you that dreamed big things slowly learned to be quieter about it. This book is for that version of you. It is not a motivational book. It is not a 5-step or a morning routine or a formula for success. It is a journey, 4 phases, honest questions, real stories, and a framework for excavating what has been keeping you where you are and reconstructing something you can actually build a life on. By the time you reach the last page, I want you to feel something specific, not just inspired. Activated, knowing that the calling you have been carrying is not a fantasy, that it's not too late, and that you cannot fail when you align yourself and walk in the direction of what you're actually built for. The release is coming before the end of the year, and when it arrives, I want you to be the first to know. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're on the email list. The link is in the description below. Because your story is not finished. It is just waiting for you to pick up the pen. I want to tell you what season 2 of The Rewrite is going to look like, because it is different from what we have been doing, and I want you to be ready for it. Season 1 was the awakening, the excavation, the reconstruction, the momentum. It was broad by design because the first work of any rewrite is seeing the full picture of where you are before you can go deeper into any part of it. Season 2 goes deeper. We're going to take each of the pillars we have built together and go into them with a lot more specifics, more prescription, more of the practical tools and frameworks that turn insight into action and intention into results. We're going to talk about relationships with more depth, about how to have the conversations that need to be had, about how to navigate the ones that are not working without burning everything down in the process. We're going to go deeper into the beliefs that were never yours to carry and the specific work of replacing them with ones that actually serve the life you're building. We're going to talk about what building a life on purpose actually looks like in the practical day-to-day, not vaguely, specifically, with the kind of actionable guidance that you can take directly from this show into your actual life. Season 1 gave you the map. Season 2 gives you the tools, and you're not going to want to miss this. I want to speak directly to the person who has been here from the beginning, who listened to every episode, who sat with the uncomfortable questions, who maybe wrote some things down and maybe did not, but showed up anyway, who kept coming back even when an episode hit somewhere tender and it would have been easier to step away. I see you. And I want to say something I mean with everything in me. I am so proud of you. Not because you finished every reflection or checked off every box, because you stayed, because something in you recognized that you were built for more and you kept showing up for the conversation that was trying to help you to get there. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. So what I owe you is simple. My continued work, my continued honesty, my continued willingness to show up for this episode after episode, even on the days when the metrics are not confirming it and the audience is still growing, and the easier choice would be to question whether any of it is working. It is working. And I promise you this, I will keep going, because getting my message out there and being the example of someone who stepped into their purpose rather than just talked about stepping into it is a non-negotiable. This is my rewrite, and I'm living it in front of you on purpose so that you know it is possible. So that when you look at someone who started at 50, who launched a podcast in grief, who is writing a book while holding down a food life, who is still learning and still growing and still showing up every Sunday, you can look at that and say, if she can do it, so can I. You can. Before season 2 begins, I want you to do something you may have never done before. I want you to write your own rewrite statement, not a goal, not a vision board, a declaration. One paragraph written in present tense as if it is already true. And start with these words. I am the author of my own life, and this is the chapter I am writing now. Then finish it with the specifics, the version of you that is stepping fully into what you're built for, what you're building, who you're becoming, what you're no longer willing to settle for. Write it. Read it back to yourself slowly and keep it somewhere you will see it every single day, because you cannot build what you cannot see, and you cannot become what you refuse to declare. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I know it was a long one. But not just today, for all of it, for every episode you showed up for every reflection you sat with, for every moment you chose this conversation over the easier option of staying exactly where you were. That choice mattered, and it is going to keep mattering as we move into what is next. If this episode landed for you, share it with someone whose story is not finished yet, because it is not. And sometimes all it takes is hearing someone say it out loud to believe it for yourself. Make sure you're subscribed. Season 2 is coming, and you don't want to miss where we're going next. This is The Rewrite, because your story isn't finished yet.